Hey Bible lovers, I'm Tim Nichols and I'm here to bring you your Nichols Worth, and today we're going to talk about my experience reading the Douay Rheims Bible. Now, this was a challenge. It is definitely older English. It has been updated by Bishop Challoner, so it's a little bit more readable than maybe the earliest version in the 1600s, but it definitely reads a little bit like the King James. I was surprised how similar some of the King James renderings are, especially considering the King James comes from the Greek and this comes from the Latin. The Greek being Erasmus' Textus Receptus, and the Latin being Jerome's Latin Vulgate. So let's talk about my experience a little bit. First, let me tell you what I read out of. I read out of the large size Douay Rheims, very nice font. This looks to be about an 11-point font, really easy to read, really nice paper. And I also spot read kind of out of the regular size. This font's a little bit smaller, but it's not too difficult to read. The layout's really nice. It is line matched, and it's also very thick and opaque paper. I'm going to show you a few things real quick just because I marked it up to let you see kind of how it took to markings. I used a Sharpie pen on this. It's kind of like a felt tip pen, and it didn't bleed through bad at all. Really nice. I also highlighted as I finished books, and you can see where the yellow kind of ghosted, but no bleed through. So this paper is excellent for marking. I also used a black Pigma Micron, and when you look on the back, you can see that didn't ghost at all. A little bit more highlighting in a Pigma Micron. My favorite thing to use ultimately is a ballpoint pen. I think a ballpoint pen works best. It doesn't ghost at all. It hardly bleeds through. That just seems to be where I've landed, and my favorite spot is those ballpoint pens. So now let me share a little bit about my experience reading the Douay Rheims and some things I noticed along the way. First of all, the Garden of Eden is called the Paradise of Pleasure in the Douay Rheims. I thought that was interesting, but Eden does mean delight, so I kind of get it. It says that the man was created from the slime of the earth. So imagine, from slime you were made, and to slime you will return. I found that very interesting because it doesn't really mean slime. I don't get the rationale behind that, but the Latin is a little bit different than the Hebrew, so okay. And then one thing I found really interesting, and this is probably the most jarring, and it's because of what this word means historically. Now I want to take a minute and explain this for a second. Okay, the word Holocaust in the world since World War II has been associated with Hitler and his horrific treatment of the Jews. And it's a very jarring word, and we only use it typically in reference to that terrible event. But you have to understand, this was hundreds of years before the Holocaust. And what they called the burnt offering in the Old Testament is the Holocaust offering, or the Holocaust. That's literally what it means. Yes, it's uncomfortable for us, but it's not an inaccurate thing. That is what it means. So just know that's in there when you read it. It is a bit jarring at first, especially for us in the Western world, but it is a literal rendition. Another thing I thought was very interesting is in Acts chapter 16, when it says the woman that had a spirit of divination, in the Greek, that literally means Pythonian spirit, and they went ahead and carried that over into the Old Testament. So every time there is a reference to the divination in the Old Testament, they use Pythonic or Pythonian spirit. Thought that was quite interesting. They went ahead and unified that, but pretty cool. Also, some words I noticed is in the New Testament, instead of the word new convert, they use the word neophyte. Never heard that before. Instead of flee, they use the word fly. Resist the devil and he will fly instead of flee. I thought that was kind of neat. And then bowels in the New Testament means affection or heart. And you'll see some of these kind of in the King James as well, these archaic words. And then this is a word, I don't know how to say it, but I'm going to say it how I think, concupiscence. And that means lust. Instead of teachers, they said doctors. There are many names and cities and towns that you're going to notice are spelled a little bit differently and take a little bit to get used to. And many of the animal names are translated more archaically, so you're not going to know what the animal is, so you may have to look that up. Genesis 29:17, where it says that Leah had weak eyes or delicate eyes, it calls her blear-eyed here. In Genesis chapter 34:31, it talks about a strumpet. I didn't know what a strumpet was. I had to look it up. It said they treat our sister as a strumpet, and it actually means a harlot or a hooker. In Genesis chapter 34:35, instead of Moses being radiant with the glory of God, they say he is horned. And that's actually believed to kind of be a misspell or a misinterpretation by Jerome, because there's two words that are very similar. One can mean horned and one can mean glory. So that's most likely just an honest mistake. In Colossians chapter 4, instead of the word cousin, it uses the word cousin German. I had no idea what that meant, and it just means cousin. So there you have that. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 22, it added the phrase swallowing down death. Now, I thought that was interesting because it's not in the original Greek, and it's not translated like that anywhere except for in the Latin. So I don't know if Jerome added that phrase for clarification, or if maybe there's some ancient document that had it that we don't have today. No idea, because Jerome did this somewhere in the late 300s AD, so really close to the original dates. And then lastly, in Revelation 9:11, when it says that the destroyer comes to destroy, it says in Hebrew it's Abaddon, in Greek it's Apollyon. Well, in this it also adds in Latin, his name is Extermins. And I'm assuming that Jerome just added that to go ahead and add the Latin definition as well, but it's definitely not in the original. Overall, I absolutely enjoyed reading the Douay Rheims. It's very different. I also read the Apocrypha. If you want to know more about my experience reading the Apocrypha, I'll go ahead and put a video in the end screen and in the description so that you can check that out. Also, if you're interested in a review of the Douay Rheims, I'll go ahead and put that in the end screen as well. So there's my experience reading the Douay Rheims. I read it in 6 months. I really enjoyed it. It is a little bit difficult. It does have some strange renderings, but overall it was a very rewarding read. God bless you. Keep calm. Jesus on. This is your Nicholas Worth.